Dr. Megan Woods.
Thank you, Mr Chairman, and I'm happy to take a short call on this bill, because as my colleague Jacinda Ardern has very well outlined, that Labor is supporting this bill because it is a sensible bill, and we are happy to support it to make sure that the issues that are addressed in this bill are no longer an issue for the elderly in our country. And I want to talk specifically to one of the amendments that Labor has put up to this bill, and Jacinda Ardern foreshadowed the part that I would be speaking on, and the previous speaker has alluded to that amendment as well, and that is the amendment that has been put up that harmonises this piece of legislation with the student allowance legislation, that brings it into line with it, and we think this is a very sensible move in redefining the age up to the same eligibility of 24 years of age as is classed as a dependent in that student allowance legislation. We think that this is needed, that student support is an issue that we are facing as a country, and we are facing it increasingly as a country. How it is that if we do want to be an innovation-led economy that bases our prosperity and our future economic development on having an educated and skilled and trained workforce, then how are we going to support our young people to gain these qualifications that are going to be of benefit to all of us in New Zealand? Now, the previous speaker alluded to some comments that the Ministry of Social Development made in regard to some of these suggestions as they came up, that perhaps tertiary students, those over the age of 18 who were engaged in tertiary education, could go and find part-time work and support themselves. Well, this is a very interesting question at the moment, because of course in the context of the youth rates legislation that we're also seeing going through this House, we see that the Ministry of Education provided advice to StudyLink, to the bit of the Ministry of Social Development that administers student allowances, that actually the $11 an hour that is proposed, the 80% of the full adult minimum wage that is proposed in that legislation, actually does pose some threats in terms of our students being able to support themselves on that $11 an hour rate. So there's a whole lot of intersecting pieces of information that we have to take into account, and that's why it is that Labor has put up this very sensible amendment to this piece of legislation that would bring this piece of legislation in line with definitions that we have operating around that very important issue of student allowance. And we think this is something that we do need to get right. We need to iron out some absurd situations that could come about. Some of these situations that my colleague Jacinda Ardern outlined about a tertiary student who's gone away to Polytech or gone away to university in another part of the country, comes back over the long summer break to stay with their parents, as all parents want their students who go away for tertiary education to do, comes back and stays. And then we have this situation of what happens in terms of the classification of dependency and how this would affect the payment. So let's just use this opportunity to make sure that this is a sensible piece of legislation and takes into account, because we think that there are many very good elements to this legislation. We think that it will improve the lives of older New Zealanders by reducing their requirement to make additional applications to receive their full entitlement, and we agree that many of the technical changes that it makes possible. One that I wanted to speak to was one that I saw around the 28-day period when the spouse of an elderly person passes away, and when it is they make their application and when their eligibility for that kicks in. That these are all things that we just need to make as smooth and as easy as possible and reduce the amount of administrative burden that are on our elderly people, but at the same time ensuring that they are receiving an income that they can survive on and that they can live alone on. Labor is happy to support this bill, Mr Chairman.
Honourable Chester Borrows.
Thank you, Mr Chairman.